This is just, I'm just learning Doug lore that I just simply...
It's like a biography of me out there.
Did not know. I can't wait for the Doug biopic to get released.
While this may not be the type of biopic that Wyatt envisioned back then during that couch stream in Copenhagen, I feel like this video interview may suffice when it comes to talking about Doug and his time in esports. Hello everyone. Nice to meet you all again. This is Pedro Romero back at it again with a new video interview for my YouTube channel. I have here with me another notable guest within the Valorant community. His name is Doug Cortez, otherwise known as EsportsDoug. He's someone that has been covering the general scene for the better part of around 2 decades, starting out in games like Halo and then FPS, and then branching out to other titles such as League of Legends and Hearthstone and Call of Duty, inevitably reaching to Valorant, starting out within the early days of the game, i.e., around beta launch 2020 up until now. And around this time, he has become one of the most notable English-speaking casters in the game right now. And so, EsportsDoug, or Doug, however you want me to refer to you from now on, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this interview. I really appreciate it. Just to start off this conversation, I'm just going to throw the simple cliche type of question. How are you doing at this moment in time?
I'm doing well, Pedro. Thank you for having me. And Doug is fine. That was quite the introduction. I'm doing well. You happen to catch me in between. Wait, when is this going live?
Around before Champions or so.
Okay, perfect. So at that point, it'll likely be public that I'm casting champs, and if not, you're going to reveal that I'm casting champs because it's not public right now. But yeah, I'm doing well. Got some downtime between LCQ and champs. I'm very excited to get to like reset, to settle down, take care of a couple of things that I've been meaning to take care of before hitting the road again for another little while. Glad to be able to do this with you.
Yeah, and of course, just covering the first topic with you doing LCQ. I just want to know what your experience was like covering that particular event, given that it was capped off by you and Balla covering the finals, between Leviathan and Crew. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, LCQ was a ton of fun. I mean, I think the tournament was a blast because the storylines wrote themselves, right? Like it wasn't from a show perspective, it wasn't difficult for us to try to rally and create storyline and create emotional investment because they were writing themselves. Crew went from 0-9, 0-10 if you consider their lock-in performance, to winning the whole thing. Leviathan reverse swept Cloud9 in the lower finals, and Cloud9 had so much high hopes, and Leviathan looked lost for most of the season, and getting to cast that match too, and getting to cast to the reverse sweep, and was just such a cool moment. So LCQ was a blast. It was kind of sad, to be honest, when it came to an end, because that is the closing of the book, so to speak, when it came to VCT Americas for its inaugural year. But it's the cliche, like, sad it's over, but happy it happened type beat.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting type of beat, particularly on your end, given that you've been able to cover particularly the domestic side and also the international level, be it your time in Americas and also Masters, a bit of lock-in, and then a bit of game changers as well. And so, looking at your time in looking at this particular season, what do you feel like has been your highlights? Your personal highlights for this year, given that although we're still in the lead up to Champions, I still feel like it's sufficient time has passed, to sort of tackle upon that particular subject. And so, again, what do you feel like has been your personal highlights?
Yeah, I think I can think of two from this year. I think being able to cast the Americas final was a very special moment for both Balla and I, to be able to cast the grand final, to be able to do so in front of a crowd, was a lot of fun. And that was the first in-person big crowd final that either of us had, and it really felt like we did it justice. And we did the series service. So that was a lot of fun. The lower final, as we were just mentioning, was a ton of fun because it was a reverse sweep and because everyone was so emotionally invested. in everything that was going on. And then Japan was really special. I think the fun thing about the series, or about this year, Pedro, if I can be honest with you, is I've been so happy while also hungry, right? Like, I've been very happy with the way that the year has gone for us, for me individually. I think I am constantly pushing myself to be better, constantly pushing myself to be the very best I can be. And this year, I've been so happy. Now I'm afraid I'm going to jinx that because I'm saying that now, and we're heading into the biggest event of the year. But I think you think about highlights, those two moments, and then all of Japan, but it was just because it was Japan, right? And you can't really go wrong with Japan. But those two moments were really special moments for me.
What do you feel like you're not completely happy, given going off of that question? Was it is it because of your past sort of like drive in wanting to be the best, from past years and past games, or is it just basically customary for you to like continue to have this, and if you don't really have that, you feel like a sort of void, if that's the appropriate way to explain it? So like, why do you feel like you still have this sort of mindset right now at this point?
Yeah, I think for better or for worse, have always been the kind of guy who's just not satisfied with being involved. I want to be the very best that I can be, and I want to push myself and improve on my craft, whatever it is I'm doing. It could be anything from casting Valorant to weightlifting, or anything else that has an element that requires me to compete or perform, or whatever it is. And again, casting is no different. So yeah, I think for me, I've always been that way. And it's a good thing and a bad thing, but I think I've just always expected so much out of myself and been so driven, to probably a fault, if I'm honest with you, on just wanting to be the very best me that I can be, and to be able to walk away from every single cast and know, like, yeah, I gave that everything that I had. And I didn't half-ass it. I didn't go into it not prepped. I didn't go into it not ready. I didn't deliver my very best time in and time out.
And looking at your current trajectory in Valorant, there's no denying that as far as this year has transpired, this is by far your most successful year when it comes to casting. You able to cast a few para finals, also been able to cast the reverse sweep lower bracket finals between Cloud9 and Leviathan. And how do you view it? How do you view it in comparison to the past 2 years, or 3 years actually? 2021, 23. No, it's 2 years. My bad. 2021,
No, you're good.
2022 compared to 2023. How much of a difference do you see yourself when it comes to you, when it comes to your growth, as a caster, and that specifically?
Yeah, I'd say there's been, from the very beginning of Valorant to say until now, I would say there's been tremendous growth, and I think that is driven because of my stubborn, hard-headed, brutish endeavor towards being the best that I can possibly be. I think when I think about the nuance of interjecting storytelling, of using wordplay, of really leaning into invoking emotion during a cast from the viewer's perspective, from the spectator's perspective, I think those are kind of things that I've really been able to lean into and focus on, and think, how can I do that better? Like, how can I genuinely, in an arena, and for people who are watching at home, right? Because the experience is so drastically different. How can I still help complement the show? Because ultimately, that's all we are at the end of the day. We're just there to complement the show. How do I complement the show in a way that has the spectator feeling like they're there? right? And they're there in that they're spectating from the arena, or they feel the tension of playing in the moment, things like that, like wanting to really invoke emotion and wanting to really pull into people getting invested into specific moments, because I mean, that's so much fun from a spectator's perspective. I remember when I first got into esports, it was many a moon ago, but wanting to or feeling the tension of a moment, of like a really close moment, and feel like, wait, why am I getting nervous, right? Like, I'm not the one playing in this. I'm not the one in this clutch 1v1 scenario, or, you know, a crazy team fight, or whatever you want to call it. But it was just so cool to experience that from a spectator's perspective and go, man, that experience was so much better for me as the spectator, because the caster did such an incredible job of telling me that story in the moment. So when it goes back to what kind of growth or you know, progress do I see for myself over the last couple of years, I think there's been tremendous growth. And you know, to fully go full circle, I think while I have to force myself to slow down and think about what the last couple of years have held. I'm really bad about that, if I'm going to be honest with you. There's still so much that I want to be better at. There's still so much that I want to improve on. There's still, yeah, I think there are a lot of things that I want to continue to refine at and get better at, for the purpose of really getting able to tell these stories, of being able to talk about player stories and player moments and things that are defying expectations, or writing history, or things like that. Just to be able to be a part of this huge picture and play such a tiny part in it, is just really freaking cool.
Out of that circle that you talked about, what do you feel like is your biggest cons that you've seen out of yourself this year?
I think there are instances in which I want to be better about setting up. So I've casted with Balla all year. That will change tomorrow, because we're casting Game Changers. I'm casting it with Sean Garris. And there are specific instances in which I want to be better about really setting up Balla, and really giving him space to like flex hard, and for me to get out of the way. Balla's one of the brightest minds in the game. And it's actually kind of dumb how criminally underrated he is when it comes to his knowledge of the game. And that's something that I have to think about often. Is like, dog, you're so fortunate to have someone that bright, someone that brilliant about the game as a co-caster. Set him up, right? Like, let him do his thing, let him flex, let him style on him. Like, he's so incredibly intelligent. And the truth is, as you know, Valorant happens so fast, and there are, like, you know, I've said this a few times, there are probably 90 really important things that happen in a round at any given point in time, and we have time to talk about 5 of them, right? So giving Balla the room and the opportunity to shine, is just something that I've wanted to be better at and want to continue to improve on throughout the rest of this year. Hopefully, come the end of champs, I'll say, yeah, freaking A, I did it. But we'll see.
Yeah, and we'll see indeed. It's funny that you mentioned Bala and that particular partnership, because it's it's a partnership that is a result of various other partnerships that you've had throughout your time in Valorant. I can just list out the people that you've worked with,
You're gonna
according
be
to
here a while.
Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, but the most notable ones, of course, you know, Rivington, Potter, Lucy May, Van Silly, Ender, and then you mentioned Scares. Um, you know, to have all of these people and work with them and have a particular partnership in terms of casting, but then reach this particular one, this special one that you've mentioned in the past, a content piece. I think it was one of your videos in which you said that you felt that this partnership with Bala was special in your eyes. What makes it special? What about it stands? What about your partnership with Balla made it stand out compared to all of the other people that you worked with?
Yeah, I think and this isn't exclusively with Balla because I can say this about a couple of other people that I've casted with, but I genuinely, or bromance here a little bit, I genuinely love the guy. Like I genuinely do. I care about him as a human. I care about his family. I care about his life. Like we're friends, and that's something that I think is not always the case when it comes to casting pairs, and I think does impact the product. It impacts it for better or for worse, depending on what side of the spectrum you're on. So for Balla and I to have the rapport that we have and to be able to like have those silly moments on camera where we get on and we're laughing about nonsense and we just understand each other's sense of humor and we'll goof off about whatever. And we can also, because we understand each other well and know each other well, know when to reel it back in and know who has to pull the other back in and different things like that. I think that comes, sorry, I just hit my mic. That comes across as so, my hope is that it comes across as so just natural, right? And I want it, in some ways, I want it to feel like people at home are just hanging out with us on a couch, just watching Valorant, right? And if we can bring across that, like, that rapport with one another in a way that makes the spectator feel a bit more calm and a bit more relaxed and more chill, then I think we're doing our job well. We also have to remember at the end of the day, man, we're talking about video games, right? Like, I think people in this industry take themselves way too seriously sometimes when it comes to stuff like this. And being able, and again, that's one of the things that's really helpful about having the relationship that I have with Balla is that we can be friends, right? Like we can be friends on broadcasts. We can be friends outside of broadcasts. And again, I think ultimately that betters the product.
And each particular partnership, casting wise, has their own quips and the things that they do that the other person recognizes, and it's sort of like their own attributes, like some of their own things. Like for example, you get look at each other like a pat on the back or something like that, and that lets the other person know that, hey, I got to do this or I got to stop doing that. You know what I mean? This sort of things that one particular partnership only does within each other. And so, what are those kinds of things that you do with Balla, out of curiosity?
Would you say during casts specifically, or even outside of it?
Everything.
Yeah, I think when it comes to feedback, I think that's honestly one of the other things that I really love about Arten is because of the relationship that we have, we can be honest with one another and we can be critical in a constructive way with one another because we both understand that the other just wants to be the best that they can possibly be. So being able to, hey, you're saying this too much. You're repeating this too much. You are leaving too much dead space. You carried into too much this, that, and the other, things like that. Those little things, I think, are things that, again, because of our relationship, we have the ability to do. And that's not always the case. Like with casting partners that I've had in the past, and then just other duo, like I know that's fundamentally just not true across the board. So it's just something I'm very thankful for and very humbled to have.
How did this friendship start with you and Balla, out of curiosity?
Yeah, we had worked. I think the first. Oh gosh, he's gonna get he. I'm not gonna remember which one exactly it was. I want to say the very first one that he did was Champs 2021 in Berlin, and he and I hit it off. Wait, was he at the first one? Dang it, dude! We had this conversation the other day too. I don't remember if anyway. We were working events together. But we weren't working together. We were just on the show together. And it just so happened that like we clicked. and we got on well together, and we would like hang out and stuff at events because we're on the road for freaking a month at a time in a foreign country. It's important to like the people that you work with. And so he and I we'd get on, we'd enjoy, like we'd hang out, we'd grab dinner, what have you. And then at the beginning of, not this year, what year are we in? 2023. At the beginning of 2022, between 2021 and 2022, during the off season, I approached Balla, and I said, "Hey, listen, let's do this thing. If you want to cast, let's cast. Like you and I have a good relationship. We know enough about each other, and we know enough about each other's goals and what we want to accomplish. So let's do this thing. Let's go for it. Let's go for it together." And he was like, "Yeah, I'm down. Let's do this thing." So we started casting together, and that's been it since.
Yeah, and for the record, he was in Champions 2021, and it was already well familiar, already covering the game around that year, same as you.
Yeah.
When you guys started casting together in 2022, did you ever get a sense at the start in which you guys would improve to this point, as in being to the level of casting international games and being one of the most most recognizable people within the English speaking Valorant casting scene?
I think it's what we both wanted. We knew that that's what we wanted to do. So I mean, was there an element of, oh crap, he was at Masters. He was at Masters Berlin. Don't tell him I forgot that, okay?
It's gonna be a video interview, so either whether he wants to or not, or it's gonna find out either way.
He wanted the same things I wanted. So that was another reason why it was such a good fit, was because we both knew what we wanted to go after. We knew that we wanted to be the very best that we could be, and being like-minded in that, I think, was just so beneficial from the very beginning.
And you highlighted, or you mentioned the start, and how you started esports in general and stuff like that. I mean, it's a topic that's been covered so many times in past interviews with yourself. I don't want to try to get too much into it because for those that are familiar with Doug, basically, as I mentioned in the intro, started off in Halo, played in a few games, competed as a player yourself, before then traversing into esports and covering as a journalist, and then eventually a caster, talent, interviewer, all that shebang. I want to cover exactly your time as a journalist because it was something that we talked about before the start of this interview. And although I understand that you are already passionate about esports around that time, which you still are, of course, why did you join, or why did you start in that esports journalist slash writing field? Because it's basically my field as well at this current moment in time. It's something that I do and that I like enjoy doing. And so, to talk to someone such as yourself who has been in that game in the past, why did you start, getting into that specific field?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I came to terms with the fact that I couldn't compete anymore. And I could not do any more like coaching, analysis, that type of work anymore. But I knew as you mentioned, I still love the industry. I still love the game. I loved everything about esports. And I knew I wanted to stay involved. And so I found out at some point in life that I have a way with words. I really enjoy writing, and so it was just a very natural marrying up of a skill set that I already had or was starting to really lean into and facilitate, and a passion of mine. And I knew that I could do it, and I'd write freelance, and I'd write for a couple of outlets, and it could be cool and get some neat opportunities and whatnot. But I never really expected it to go beyond that. I knew it would be something fun. I knew I'd have a blast. But that was really that's really as far as I expected it to go. So it was honestly more passion and interest and hobby at that point than anything else.
Yeah, and for those of you who are not familiar with Doug's past career within esports journalism, he actually worked within ESPN covering the esports vertical for around a few years up until the ending of that vertical in around 2020. And so, how did you join ESPN? Because that's an interesting thing that not many people would have recognized. So how did that happen for you?
Yeah, I remember. Oh my gosh, the editor at the time, who man, I wonder what he's doing now. We haven't talked in so long. At that point, I was still heavily involved with Halo. I still loved Halo. I was still working with Halo. And that was around 2016, I think. And at that point, I had done some writing for smaller outlets. And one of the editors, the main editor there at the time, reached out to me and said, "Hey, I heard you're well versed in Halo. They have a world championship. We want to cover some work we want some work essentially to cover the event. Would you be interested?" And I'm like, oh, freaking hey, right? Like, heck yeah, it's ESPN. Who's gonna say no to ESPN? And that was just like the start of something really cool because I was able to establish relationships with a couple of people off of that and get to write for that vertical, and then make friends. Like, there are friends that I still talk to from work that I did during that time. And to fast forward into Valorant, some of those friendships ended up being why I was able to do things like come on. Because when ESPN still had an esports vertical, they were putting out Valorant content. They had a weekly show, and they had like power rankings and stuff like that. And because of those relationships, I was able to come on the show a couple of times. And yeah, it just goes to show, like, just be good to people, right? Like, be good to the relationships that you have, be good to the people that you meet, and who knows? It could end up in really neat opportunities for you later in life.
Yeah, and you also worked with Red Bull, also publishing pieces for them as well. So what about that? How what about that experience? What was the experience like over there?
Yeah, Red Bull was really cool too. That was probably the first big outlet that I wrote for. I had written for a couple of other smaller ones, and that was one where I sought them out. I knew that I don't remember where I saw it. It's probably Twitter or something. I saw some tweet that they were looking for writers to cover some stuff and some social media stuff. So I instantly reached out. I'm like, hey, I would love to do this. Here's the pitch on the first piece that I want to put out. And it was about a Halo pro at the time who is legendary, who was retiring. I wonder if it's still out there. Yeah, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
It was about Ogre 2. February 21st, 2017. Wild. Yeah, so I reached out to them. I pitched the idea. They loved it. They ran with it. And then, oddly enough, I never wrote for Red Bull again after that. It was just one piece. And they loved it. And it was great. Yeah. But then I transitioned to ESL and ESPN and a couple of other outlets like that, and that was the only one.
Did you even like attempt to pitch them another piece or something like that, or was that basically literally one and done?
I don't remember, to be honest. I mean, I would assume I did. It was just so long ago. I genuinely don't remember.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned about your time in Instant Esports and also ESL, working as a contributor in content and, creating that type of content. So what kind of content did you create within within ESL and also in Instant as well?
Yeah, Instant Esports, I was just doing writing. And if I remember, if at the very beginning it was just volunteer writing. There was an app that was being put together and a website, and they were wanting to put esports content out there. And I'm like, yeah, I'm down. I love esports. At that time, I was really watching League of Legends a lot. And they were primarily focused on League, so it was just a natural transition to be able to create some content for them. And then for ESL, it was a lot of social media stuff and then written content as well. And we did some video stuff, but it was primarily social media and writing.
What would you say is your favorite piece that you've done throughout your time writing? It might also be one of those research papers that you put in, because I remember I've read some of your research papers about like TSM and having them qualify for LCS. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So and it's worded as like an essay piece. So
Yeah.
so how did you like? What's your favorite written piece?
My first thought was the Ogre 2 one that I was just referring to. I used to have a Pressfolio that had a lot of my work up, and I can't find it with a quick Google search. But I really enjoyed. I'm a nerd, man. I'm a nerd. I like nerdy things. I get lost in analytical things, and I like to think about. I like to think a lot about the game that I'm covering, and so things like that TSM piece, for example, I really enjoyed because it was. I also wrote a piece about like an argument for having a best of 3 series as opposed to best of 2 or best of 1 series in League of Legends way back then, and it was primarily geared towards like analytics and thinking about data and what do we do with the data and how do we interpret the data and things like that. So I'd say probably one of those more nerdy ones where I just got lost in the sauce and spent probably way more time than people cared to know about when it came to researching stuff like that to come across with points.
What about interview pieces, like profile pieces? What's your favorite out of that bunch?
Yeah. I would have said the Ogre 2 one, but it was about him. I didn't get to talk to him. That's a tough one, man. I don't know. There have been a couple of like human interest pieces that I've put out that I've really enjoyed, but I don't know that I could pick a favorite.
Or could you at least give one off the top of your head, like best as you can? Or
Yeah, there was it was another Halo piece at the time where this was an old friend, and that's probably why it was special. Was for a player who was retiring at the time, but then he came back, and he and I have lost touch. Our lives have just kind of gone separate ways, but Pistola was his name. Was just again a friend first, and I got to know him really well, and he and I worked together at the very beginning of both of our careers, and he's now a pro and he's doing exceptionally well for himself, and he's vibing and he's thriving. And being able to cover him and his story and things like that was just really cool.
and keep in mind for the listeners and the viewers that are following along the things that Doug is saying, you've been doing this with another job as well, right? With another job.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I worked full time. I had a full time job on top of all of this up until what was it, May of last year? So a little over a year ago, a year and some change ago.
yeah, and it's an interesting thing to consider because it's a sort of parallel to what I'm experiencing right now. Because I have another job, so I'm kind of busy in terms of time, on top of covering Valorant, League of Legends, and Dota 2. And I want to ask, like, how did you balance that? So when I say
Mm.
that, I want to first start out by asking, let's go to a time machine and let's go back in time to when you were a writer. And so what would a day be like for you when you're doing your work in your standard job and then also in your esports job? What is the timeline like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I didn't do either of them exceptionally well, to be honest with you, because I think it was just way too much to balance. On top of having a personal life and everything else that comes along with that. Again, I'm sure I didn't do either of them well at all at the time. But I mean, casting, or I mean, early on in casting was another really good example of that. Like I'd work depending on where I was, because we moved around a few times and I had a couple of different jobs, but. For example, we lived in Minnesota for a little while. I was working for Target corporate offices out of Minneapolis, and commute depending on the day was brutal. So it'd be like a 10-hour day, 12-hour day, and then get home, try to eat, and then get straight into casting or into creating content and stuff like that. And it was just a grind, bro. And that's where I think, again, I'm sure I didn't do either of them exceptionally well when I was trying to balance both, but I was stupid enough, I guess, to think that I had a shot at this, and I loved doing it, and so I was going to give it a fair chance and kind of see how things would shake out. And I don't know, I'd say it's working out okay for now.
And out of curiosity, if you would like to share in terms of compensation, because I understand that I can speak as a current journalist myself. The compensation is all right. We'll leave it at that. It's a little all right.
Yeah.
But what was it like for you in terms of like getting compensated for your work? Not just in ESPN, but
Yeah.
like a pre ESPN and then also during ESPN. Let's split it up into those two parts.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned earlier, the first couple of outlets that I wrote for was just volunteer. It was just, we want content. Would you like to produce content? Yes, cool. Let's do it. And then even for other ones shortly after that, I think of the other outlets that I wrote for that were paid, it wasn't very much. It wasn't very much at all. And I think it was nice to be able to say, I remember the first time I was like, I just got paid to write a freaking piece for whatever the outlet was about esports. And then, it was like $50 or $100 or something like that, right? Like it wasn't much of anything, but it was more about the principle of the matter, right? Of being able to do that at that time. That was just, it was very cool.
And of course, and diving into Target, I want to. One of the things that irked me when it came to going back in your interviews is that nobody mentioned a lot about your time there, and it's something that I feel like it's interesting because looking at your life, it's sort of like not to sound redundant, but interesting, it amplified to an umpteenth degree. Although you might not say the same for yourself, but still, um, you were you worked in the pharmacy, you worked in stocks, you were an executive, you worked in inventory, you worked as an inventory business analyst, and also in the supply chain, all that jazz. So what was that like? What was that experience like in Target? And how did you ascend up the work chain, if I might say so myself?
Yeah. Target. I mean, I'll admit, Target for a long time was very good to me. I think I was with the company for, all in all, for a little over 10 years. When I left them to do esports full time, to do commentary full time, but they were very good to me. I think to start, I remember the first job I had, I got hired on at Target, like unloading trucks overnight, right? Like, and then through time and through hard work, really, I was able to continue to promote, like you had mentioned, and that's what took us to Minneapolis to work for their corporate offices. So being able to rise up in the ranks, so to speak, to be able to do that, I think again, Target was a great company to work for. They were very good to me, and I think I was able to not well, but balance a lot of the things in life that I wanted to balance. Especially more so when the last, I don't know, probably what, like 3-4 years or so when I was a target.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is like about your time in Target? What would you say like is your like the hardest, like the most difficult thing that you had to do for you when it comes to you working within that company?
Yeah, I think probably when we first moved to Minneapolis, that was probably the hardest because we had moved to Minneapolis. We didn't know a single soul. We'd never been there before. It was an entirely different culture because we were living in the Southeast at the time from when we moved from there to Minneapolis. And it was just hard, man. The all of the difficulties and intricacies that come with making a move, doing so to a notably different area of the United States. And then doing it right before the doldrums of winter when nobody goes outside, when, you know, everyone, it's like negative 20 degrees outside without wind chill. Like it's just some sort of like inhuman place that should never exist. You only read about it. To be able to try to like dig in roots and to settle and find community and establish yourself in a situation like that was super difficult. So the first, I mean, really the first year in Minneapolis, trying to adjust to a new job with everything else that was going on at the time, such a drastically different job too, right? Going from working in stores to working in a corporate office, and even just that nuance. Yeah, it's in the same company, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's a different company. It's a different job. It's everything about it is drastically different.
Yeah, it's also like working with different people as well, because it's not just
Yeah,
like you're working with like your fellow colleagues like on the ground. You know, you got to work with executive with the suits. You know, stuff like that.
yeah, just very different. And I think all of those differences and all of the nuances that came along with making a transition like that at that time was just, it was just hard. It was very difficult. Just very, very taxing.
Mm. And rewinding a little bit from Target, you mentioned in the past in a video from VCT Americas earlier this year that you lived in New York.
Mm.
You lived in New York for at the start of your life. And so, what was talk to me about how what was it like during that time? You know, living in New York and before going into Minnesota.
Yeah, we so I was born and raised in New York, in Queens. And we grew up in a rougher part of town. I think we were very um very thankful for what we had, but we were, I mean, we're also very poor. Like we grew up on like food stamps and things like that. Like I remember as a kid multiple instances in which like we didn't have hot water, things like that. Like it was it was yeah, it was very um very poor. Um and we were there for the gosh, 16 years, something like that, the vast majority of my life. Well, I guess I don't know, I'm getting so old at this point, it's probably not that anymore.
That old? You're not that old. You're still
i'm
like
I'm 33, dog.
it's still young.
In esports, we're prehistoric right now. But I say that to say for like the what is now, I used to say it was more than half of my life, and that's just not the case anymore. But yeah, was there, lived in New York for a while, and then moved to Georgia before eventually bopping around the Southeast a little bit more, and then heading to Minneapolis eventually.
So you stayed around. So you stayed there up until like it was time to graduate high school, right?
Yeah, and then I did college in Georgia, and then eventually transferred to Alabama, and that's where I graduated from, the University of Alabama.
hmm hmm And you also mentioned about how you encountered a difficulty when it came to assimilating to both cultures, since both of your parents, your families from Colombia, and then you were born in the U.S. And so, talk to me about that difficulty, like diving into that specific particular aspect, if you'd like. Um, how difficult was it to find your assimilation into both cultures, the American culture and also your Colombian culture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't much like starting to realize a lot of life. I don't know that I've done either of them exceptionally well. Um, but yeah, I mean, I remember both of my parents, as you mentioned, are Colombian, so I learned English in school. Spanish was my first language, which is cool now because I get to do things like Spanish interviews on broadcasts and things like that. But that was, you know, I people give me a hard time all the time because they're like, I mean, you sound white, you get passed as white. There's nothing Hispanic about you. But then people get to know me a little bit better. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we see it now, we get it. So I don't know that I do quite the right service to my Colombian roots, to my Colombian heritage, if you will. But it's something I want to lean into a little bit more. I don't know. I just don't even think about it more often than not.
Well, let me make you think about it harder. Um, do you, when it comes to like that particular factor, I want to ask out of curiosity,
Mm.
do you identify yourself as like American or American Colombian or Colombian? Because for me, I have a particular, I have the same sort of upbringing such as yourself. My parents, they came into the US from Mexico. And so I was born here in the US, in Texas. And I was brought up by that family. And even though I have assimilated to US culture and that stuff like that, I have more of an affinity towards Mexico because that's where my
Sure.
parents came from. And, that's how I feel more as like a Mexican, like a Mexican American than
Mhm.
an American Mexican. You know what I'm saying? Something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, absolutely. You lean
So,
more that way. Yeah.
mhm. and
Yeah.
it's kind of ironic because I am someone who am a writer in English and I work around that English language. But still, out of curiosity, going back into you, do you think of yourself like as an American or a Colombian American or Colombian? What do you think?
Yeah, probably Colombian American, I would say. I don't think of myself as only an American, and then I definitely don't think of myself as only Colombian because again, I think I mean the amount of times I speak Spanish in life these days is to my parents sometimes. Uh, if I'm doing like interviews or talking to Spanish pro players or things like that, like I don't use it a ton. I will say there was there was one night where it was around Mother's Day. We decided after working a VCT show one day, we decided that we all wanted to go get Colombian food. So I took, gosh, who was there? GB was there, Sideshow was there, Riv, Vansili, Balla, and Dryad. I think, and then me. And I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. I'm gonna feel bad about it. But I got to take them to have like their first like actual Colombian experience in a Colombian restaurant, and it was a hoot. It was a wild time. The food was fire, and they had a really good time as well. So I still got some Colombian in me. It's still in there.
It's interesting because I'm kind of the same way. Like, I don't really speak a lot of Spanish outside of like my work and stuff like that. It's only with my parents or whenever I'm like in conversation with like other peers or like other Hispanic people, I just say basically slang like Mexican slang, like
Yeah.
like fucking or like cabron or pendejo,
Yeah,
stuff like that,
yeah, yeah.
and like
Bro,
Mex
the amount of times I'll randomly slip out a pendejo or a coño or something like that, we're like, yeah, we see it. Oh,
yeah,
it was
yeah.
Sideshow. That's why I was forgetting who was at the dinner. Sideshow. And
Yeah,
of course, I forget the egg. He's so forgettable.
uh, forgettable in a loving way. One might say so, like myself. And going back into your childhood, I want to ask: did you have any sort of preferences, or did you have like any sports that you that you liked, or any like hobbies that you liked besides getting into video games and esports, was there any preferences besides that?
Yeah, I grew up playing sports most of my life. I loved baseball, still do. Um, because I'm from Queens, I'm a diehard Mets fan, and it's tough sledding. We suck. Let's call it what it is. We suck. But you know what? We paid a lot of money to have players who are underperforming. So it's just another year in the life of a Mets fan. So I played baseball a ton, and then I wrestled through high school as well. So sports have always been something that I've really enjoyed, and honestly, that's probably why esports is as appealing to me as it is. Was because for a long time it was another competitive outlet. It was another way for me to compete with people, and to be able to test myself, if you will, in different arenas. So it was just such a natural transition because I grew up playing video games, but not competitively. But it was just something I did, and I was a kid, whatever. I loved it. I enjoyed doing it, what have you. And then I find out about, wait a second, I can compete in this. And not only can I compete in this, but at the time, there was money in it, but it was nothing compared to what it is now. I'm like, but hang on, I can also get paid to do this? Like, what are we talking about? And so I started to go to like small local tournaments, and I was hooked. So being able to compete against other people, in front of other people, again, to test myself, it was just such a natural transition. And I think loving sports from the beginning, I paved the way for that in a lot of ways.
Did you have a particular gamer tag that you had at the start, or did you just use your name?
No, I went, gosh, I'm trying to think of the very first one I can think of. And it was Doug for a long. It's been Doug for a long time.
Yeah.
But if I go all the way back, like 2006, 2005, when I first started competing, it was APOC for a while. But I think it's been Doug for so long. Yeah. Doug's just the name is boring, bro, and I'm like, I just can't be bothered to come up with this, that, and the other. Just call me Doug.
So why you put in esports? Like you just call yourself Doug, or why you have to put in EsportsDoug?
Bro, if I would pay an obscene amount of money, I would pay every single dime that I had left if it meant that I could have Doug on all socials, on all channels. If I could just have Doug, bro, I'm vibing. But Doug happens to be one of the more painfully common names that exist out there. And so just Doug is not an option. Doug _ is not an option. _Doug is not an option. Doug is taken. FPS Doug is bro, like I never had a chance with a name like Doug.
Doug FPS?
That's also taken, I'm sure.
Doug Esports?
Oh, that's actually, it's funny that you say that. There is an org called Doug Esports that I have. It's become like a joke. I actually have no affiliation with it, but they've tried recruiting me to their esports org. It's all troll and tongue in cheek, but there is a Doug Esports out there that I am apparently part owner of without having any affiliation with it at all.
They just named you that? They just gave you the name without any warning or something?
Yeah, I don't think it started with me at all. But it just so happens that they're in esports and I'm EsportsDoug, and yeah, their bio is Professional Esports Organization NA. We love Doug. Is it me? I don't know. Probably not. But they have like DM me and they've come in my chat and they've like, they're fun. They're cool. Whoever it is that's behind that name, whoever it is that's behind that account, they're cool. They're cool.
Cool indeed. And then jumping forward a bit in time, around 2018 or so, around that time, 2018, 2019, you started working in Call of Duty, in the Call of Duty League, and you also participated in a few watch parties for the Minnesota Rokkr. And so it was around that time in which you were doing full-on content creation for different orgs, not just Minnesota Rokkr. You even worked in version 1 for a time, covering a few events and stuff like that. And so, but particular going back into that time in Call of Duty and watch parties, managing that kind of field, um, how did you tackle that particular aspect? Because it's a sort of thing that requires like management and requires engagement, constant engagement as well, in trying to retain viewership for this particular stream and stuff like that. And so, how did you work around that particular avenue?
Yeah, the Minnesota Rokkr and what ended up being version 1 later on as the big parent company. I got fortunate because I was living in Minnesota at the time, and I found out that the Call of Duty League was starting to have franchise spots, and Minnesota got one randomly, and I'm like, wait a second, that's really dope. So I put myself out there and I reached out to the people who were working there at the time, and I'm like, hey, this is what I can do. This is what I'm about. I'd love to be involved and I'd love to work with you guys in any way that I can. So they started to have me like host in-person watch parties. So I would do like MC type things and hang out with them. And I got to know a lot of the people that worked on that staff and make friends from the people that work there. But then as they transitioned into Valorant, at that point, I was already kind of starting to lean towards Valorant on my own. And they decided that they wanted to get into Valorant. So that was just such a natural transition point at that time because they knew me, because I knew them, because they knew that I was in Valorant, because I knew they wanted to get into Valorant. They are like, hey, we want to do things like watch parties, online remote watch parties, because, COVID and everything that was going on in the world at the time. That was the only option. So being able to do things like that for them was, again, just another like natural, really cool fit where I was able to work alongside them and do some of that stuff with them. And, it even culminated in the opening. So the opening event that year for the Call of Duty League was in Minnesota, and they were at
Like a theater, right?
Yeah, the
Something like
Armory.
that? Yeah,
The Armory. Does that sound right? I think it's Armory.
because it was at a
Maybe.
particular event and it was promoted around, or like promoted pretty well around that time.
Yeah, yeah. It was a LAN, and I want to say it was the very first Call of Duty League 1, and it was at the Armory or whatever. And they had me do like emceeing in the venue live in person. So again, that was just such like a really cool marrying up of things, of the Call of Duty stuff that I was working on and things that I enjoyed doing. I think it also started because put I put myself out there, and I offered to run like Discord tournaments for them and things like that. So I was just persistent and, hey, I want to be involved. Hey, this is what I can do. I would really enjoy this. This is just fun for me. And it just transitioned into so much more.
Yeah, and it's that assertive manner in which you make the opportunity yourself, and you try to join events no matter what. And it's something that you've mentioned time and time again in various of your content pieces. It's a pretty admirable thing. And looking at your trajectory again, your Wikipedia page that you list that you worked in various games, but one game caught my attention. Well, actually two, but first one, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking, but it's not that. It's not.
It's
It's
not
not
that
that.
one? Okay,
It,
okay.
we'll get that. We'll get to that later. Okay, we'll get to that later because I already know. I know you. I know you. You know that I know. Okay, so before that, it's Smash Ultimate,
Yeah.
or Smash. There's not much info about your coverage of Smash, as far as I know. So, what was that experience like for you in Smash? Because it's a fighting game, and it's something that's far beyond the sort of normal games that you've been covering.
Yeah, very different. It wasn't much, to be honest. It was just smaller local tournaments, and there was a big LAN that happened in Minnesota. They did it for 2 years, and I did some Smash commentary for it there. But that was really the extent of it. I think I grew up. There was the peak era of gaming during like Halo 1, Halo 2, Smash Melee, right? And that was something that a lot of people, and then COD 4 shortly thereafter. And So I played Smash for a while. It was something I really enjoyed doing. I still play it on occasion, very rarely. But I did. I mean, it was very, very little commentary there.
What do you feel like, uh, given that you've covered so many games throughout your time before getting into Valorant, what do you feel like is the hardest title that you had to cover, and why?
My first thought was League, because of the depth to the game. Hey, as someone who comes from Dota, where there's way more depth to it than League has, there was just so much there. I mean, the game fundamentally, you have champions. I forgot what they were called for a second. Champions that are there. You have to know all of their kit and their cooldowns and the damage and what it scales with, and interactions that they have and different things like that. And then you have to think about how different item builds, either complemented or what all of the interactions between stuff like that. And then you have to consider the fact that that's changing on a very regular basis for 100. How many champs are they up to now? Probably 200 or close to 200, something like that.
500, basically.
Yeah,
That's
a
what it
lot.
feels like. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to be ready because at any given point in time, they can bust out a pick of a champ that you haven't seen in a super long time, and you have to be ready for things like that. And then also, the game fundamentally has a lot of depth to it from a strategy perspective. And all of that stuff, that's probably why I was attracted to it, to be honest with you, was because of the depth of having to study and having to learn the game and really get, again, I am a nerd. I enjoy stuff like that. So really being able to devote a lot of time to learn the game was something that was outrageously difficult just because of how much there was to it. But it was also so satisfying because it was just something I enjoyed.
There was a time in which you messaged Captain Flowers on advice on how you want to gain a presence within the esports scene and how you can get better as a caster, as a talent, whatever it is that you wanted to do. Um, did you do the same for other people for other games, And if so, what examples can you give that stood out to you the most?
I guess it would have been for other games, but I remember there was a point in which I was sending out my reel to a lot of people. Just because at that point I decided that commentary was something that I wanted to pursue and something that I knew I would love doing just from like a commentary perspective itself. So I was just so hungry and like, hey, Captain Flowers was a really good example because he was just so gracious with his time and so helpful. And he's like, yeah, dude, he told me about his backstory, where he came from, what he was doing. He was casting like Skype. He was doing Skype casts. And there was like a Skype group, if I remember correctly, and he was the only one who made it out from that group of up and coming casters who were hungry, who wanted to get involved. And I sent that reel out to a lot of people. There were a lot of people who didn't respond. A lot of people who just kind of ignored. And then there were those who took the time to respond, who were just really cool and really helpful, and who gave even the time of day to watch the reel, right? Like, you could have ignored it. You could have ignored the DM. You could have, I don't have time for this, what have you. But for them to take the time not only to watch it and not only to say, hey, this is a pretty good reel, but in some instances to give thorough feedback, right? Like point on you do this well. This is where I think you need to get better, and things like that was just really encouraging and also really helpful, right? Because I think for a lot of people, you put yourself out like that and you just get donowalled and you get ignored or whatever. And that discourages a lot of people, right? Like, that could be the end of the road for a lot of folks. So just so thankful to have people who were willing to watch and willing to respond and willing to listen and give feedback and things like that.
Which remark or sentence or like line a person has given to you that you still remember to this day? Like Captain Flowers told you this and that, and then you still keep that in your mind. So, besides that, what other person or what other line, remark, advice, etc., do you look back on and then you still keep in your mind, which is still present even to this
Hmm.
day? As a caster in Valorant.
I don't know that there's one that's regularly front of mind, but when you asked me just now, the first thing that came to mind was so the very first Riot event that I worked was Masters Reykjavik, the first one, the one that Sentinels won. It was all remote, and at that point, there was the producer there who decided that he wanted me on the show. His name was Arthur. The fact that Arthur wanted me on the show to begin with was so humbling, right? Because you spend so much time like grinding and trying to make it in commentary, and you think to yourself a lot of times like, when do I call it quits, right? Like, when do I come to terms with the fact that this is not going to work? But I remember that event was exceptionally interesting because for whatever, I don't know why they did this, but there was a break in between the tournament. There was like a week break or like a 4-day break or something like that. Essentially, it worked over 2 weekends or 2 weekends and change. And we had a feedback meeting in between. And Arthur reached out to me, wanted to get time just to see how I was doing, to give me feedback, to talk about the things I can do better, what have you, and to just like check in, which is just really cool, right? I'm sure the cat was super busy. And I want to say I was of that talent team. I'd have to go back and look, but yeah, surely I was the greenest of the bunch. And he asked me how I was doing. I'm like, this feels surreal, to be honest with you. Like, I spent so much time thinking about what this would be like and, wanting to do this and work towards this. And, he unprompted said, well, listen, you belong here and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And so again, that's not something that I'm thinking about on a daily basis. But when you asked me that conversation was the first thing. It was like, yeah, that instantly came to mind.
And I want to go back I want to revert back into a little bit of what you said right then and there. So it was around before Masters Reykjavik 2021 in which you felt at most that you wanted to leave Valorant, or was there a particular time before that?
I think I'm sure there were multiple instances where I was like, this. The comparison that I like to make to this a lot is, I can love basketball, right? I can love basketball all I want. That doesn't mean I can dunk, right? That doesn't mean anything about it. And so when it comes to ability, and for esports, it was the same. I can love esports. I can think I have what it takes. I think I can be good at commentary, what have you. Maybe I'm just not, right? And that's a harsh reality that you have to face when you pursue something for a while and you know what you want to do. Maybe you're just not good enough. That's real talk, right? And for myself with commentary, it was at the beginning of that year where I said, it would have been the previous year because we were doing Ignition series. And I had done some first strike stuff. I didn't do the final first strike, but I worked a couple of the first strike qualifiers. But I remember at the beginning of that year going, okay, this is the year where I'm gonna give it what I've got. I'm gonna give it everything I have. I'm gonna leave no stone unturned. I'm gonna put reels out. I'm gonna hustle. And if I make it, I make it. And if not, then I can at least say I gave it everything I had. And even within that year, there were a couple of instances in which it felt like it's not going to work, right? Like I had worked a couple of events and I wasn't getting callbacks, and people weren't reaching out to me. So that's when I did. I'm sure you saw this, but that's when I did the eUnited charity event, was because I knew that I wanted to cast, and I knew that I wasn't getting the calls that I wanted. Right, wasn't reaching out. Ignition series events. I had done one. Oh no, I hadn't even done one. But I knew I wanted to do them, and then after this came the FaZe Invitational. But I decided, okay, if I'm not going to get what I want, I'm I am actually going to leave no stone unturned, and I organize my own tournament. And I reach out to Cloud9 and eUnited and Gen G and a couple of these other. TSM was supposed to play in it at the time. They ended up not playing in it. But it was a I'm going to make a way. But even then, like after that, things really took off, and things were that's really what felt like the launching point, so to speak.
It was your ignition. Your ignition.
Yeah, that was my ignition. Nice. And it wasn't up until that, and then even sometimes after that, where I thought like, you're not good enough. Maybe you're not good enough. Maybe you don't have it. Because again, I missed out on First Strike. I wasn't invited to First Strike, and that was after doing all the qualifiers, and that was after doing all the stuff leading up to it. But things struck at the right time.
Would it be fair to say that it was that particular moment, you doing that charity clash in collaboration with eUnited, was that like your Hail Mary?
Yeah. And it was such a stupidly ambitious idea, bro. Like I decided we put that together. And I say eUnited, I brought them on board, and it was like a 10K charity invitational. We did it in a week. In a week, we put together getting all the teams, getting sponsors, getting graphics, getting a full run of show, getting a producer, getting all of that stuff. Like we did it in a week. It was so, I mean, it was great because it worked out, but also it was so stupid to think, dude, we're going to run our own tournament. And well, I was the idiot. I was the idiot, not them. I was the idiot. Dude, I'm going to run my own tournament and we're going to organize this in a week. What was I thinking? People take months to do stuff like that. And so it literally consumed every thought and every moment that I had for that week. But again, the Hail Mary landed, so I guess it was worth it. It worked out.
I've heard countless I've heard you recount this experience countless times, but it was basically, to me, in my opinion, on the surface level. You just sort of mentioned it was my last chance, this and this and that, and it worked out. But I want to get in deeper into that. How did you pitch that sort of idea to eUnited and also the rest of the competing teams? Like how did that even happen? How did you even get that pitch together?
Yeah, I was fortunate because there wasn't a ton of. I mean, at that point, Riot was still sort of involved, but they were kind of keeping a distance and letting orgs and other things run stuff like that. And the timing was just perfect, where there wasn't a ton of other Valorant going on. There was like a lull, so to speak, in the calendar, and teams wanted to play. Teams wanted to be competing and doing something. So I think it was a relatively easy sell when teams considered that they still needed. I mean, teams were still young. Teams were like, so much of it was still at the very beginning of Valorant. So there weren't a ton of tournament. There weren't a ton of tournaments. Teams were still figuring out the way to play the game correctly. And all these other things compiled in a way that when I reached out to Cloud9 and Gen G and I don't even remember who else played in it at the time. Ninja, when Ninja was still competing in Valorant, Ninja played in the tournament. It was a, oh yeah, let's play, right? Like it's for charity, it's going to feel good. And then also the important thing is there are other names that are competing in this, right? So it from their perspective, it was an easy sell because it was a competitive experience for nothing. But trying to get other people on board, I'm like, hey, we want to do this by next weekend. We want to do this by this weekend, right? We want to do this and it's 4 days from now. Are you in? Yeah, that part was dumb. But even again, it worked.
But even so, it is surprising given the fact that they said yes to this sort of tournament that would just cobbled together so quickly. And as you said, in the space of a week, it featured names that are still contributing to the Valorant scene today. some of which includes people that I've interviewed throughout my time in esports. Effie's, GMD, Asuna, KP, Aaron, Tig,
Yeah.
people that are still within it, even Mitch as well. Um, people that are still in the scene and still contributing to it, be it VCT Tier 1, Tier 2 game changers, and stuff like that. And so when you look back at that event and how that transpired, where do you think it stands within at the game's history? Because as you mentioned, it happened in at a time in which Riot hadn't really intervened into that competitive aspect yet. It was just basically them seeing how the competitive scene was organically or was organically morphing itself. And
Mm.
so, how do you view that particular event and its place within the competitive Valorant space?
I've never really thought about it, to be honest. I think when you put it like that, yeah, I mean it is pretty cool that some of the names you listed competed, right? And they were involved, and that was very early on. But I think in the grand scheme of things, like, I don't know, it was such a small speck in the bigger picture. That yeah, I guess I've never really thought about it that way at all, and I don't think I would. I think, again, it was such a small speck in the grand scheme of things, in the bigger picture of what was going on with Valorant and the trajectory that it was on. That it was, I'm humbled, and I think grateful for the randomly cool opportunity that it was. That, I say randomly cool, but again, it was due to brutish stupidity that it worked, and it got to the point that it did. But yeah, I'm in a lot of ways, man, I'm lucky that it worked out. I'm lucky that it worked to begin with.
I mean, like you say it's a spec and stupid, but it led to you. It led to you.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I wouldn't call it a spec in the same way as you are. Given that on top of it, contributing to the continuation of those aforementioned players, it gave you a springboard to prominence, if I might say so myself, because from then on, you then started working more into Valorant and started covering domestic side and then also international level. And so I feel like it's not a spec. I feel like I feel it is a pretty important part within the space in terms of leading to the true start of yourself. So that's how I see it. A pretty
Yeah,
big.
yeah, that's fair. I guess if we think about, like, my storyline, then yeah, I think without that tournament, I'm not here, right? I'm not in esports. I'm working a full-time job for Target, probably, or something else. I don't know, right? Um, Maybe still in Minneapolis at the time. Who knows? But I think in the grand scheme of Valorant, I think, I mean, this thing that's being created, this thing that is birthed, right? That's existing, that's growing, is just so much bigger than I think anything any of us, and probably, to be honest with you, given conversations I've had with riders, than any of them could have fathomed, right? We're talking about, I mean, this game is not going anywhere anytime soon, right? And so, again, when I zoom out and I think about it like that big a picture, it was nothing, right? But I guess for me individually, I think I've never really thought about it this way, but I like how you put it. You called it a Hail Mary, because that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's 1,000% what it was.
Yeah, and it certainly was indeed. And it's time to talk about it. When it comes to okay, so I can say that my interest in you Doug, when it comes to doing interviews, was growing at a particular amount, but it wasn't until that couch stream you had with Platchat in Copenhagen that it shot you up right up into my top 5 list. And from there, I had to work with other. I had to like continue to build my presence within the space by talking to players and then building myself up, which led to me talking to Y, which I am very fortunate to doing. And now at this point, it's been mentioned various times and a little bit at times, but back in 2019, you covered the world championship of an arcade game called Big Buck Hunter. So
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about the experience and what that was like, but come on, you can't just leave us with that and not talk about how it even started. So,
Dude,
how
yeah.
did that even start?
It was wild. So a buddy who I had met through Halo many, many years ago was working for it's not Play Mechanics. Or maybe it is Play Mechanics and Raw Thrills is it? I don't know. It was working for the company that makes Big Buck Hunter. And I find out because he's working it every year and, we keep up and I find out that he's like, yeah, I'm going to whatever to work this Big Buck Hunter World Champs. I'm like, you're working what? He goes, yeah, Big Buck Hunter World Champs. And he sends me this video and it's a highlight reel of just what seems like a weekend long party, bro. Like, and that's what it looked like on the screens. But they were like doing it, right? Like they were throwing a party. First place got like 20 grand or something like that. I'm like, what is this world? I've never heard of anything like this. And so I like watched from a distance and buddy, his name is Callum. I want to say we tried it one year and it didn't work. And then the next year it did work. He's like, hey, dude, you should come cover. You should come work. You should come like work the show. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm down. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to freaking turn down the opportunity to work the Big Buck Hunter World Championships. And sure enough, it worked out that year that you mentioned. And it was, I suspected it was a party the entire time. And I was right. It was a party the entire time. I remember we started the show before the cameras were on, before the doors were open, before it literally anything. Everyone got into that year. It was at the Esports Arena in Vegas, or the HyperX, the Esports Arena, the HyperX Arena, whatever. We all get together in the main room, and we all took a shot. And then they went and they opened the doors. And as soon as that happened, I went, "Oh, okay. This is what we're in for. This is what kind of show it's going to be." And it was awesome, dude. It was a blast. We had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. It was silly, and yeah, it's a shame that I wasn't able to continue to do it because I want to say it's still happening. Like it's still a tournament series, but
It's still happening. I checked the recent videos and they had a tournament last year in 2022, and I
yeah,
feel like that's still going to be the case for this year, up to my knowledge.
yeah, I would think so. Very very nice community too, which is just crazy to think about. But yeah, there is a Big Buck Hunter community out there that's outrageously welcoming and very kind and very friendly, and just very cool people. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
I want to ask, how many drinks did you have that night?
Not as many as you would think because I was still on camera, right? Like I was still working the show. But it was just again, it was a party. It was a party all weekend. I've never worked a show like that ever again, and I'm sure never in my life will I work a show like that again in esports. There's no way.
And I believe you also mentioned that you were approached to cover last year as well, right? Because
Yeah,
back then,
or 2 years ago.
yeah, because like
Yeah,
that.
they go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, they reached out about wanting to do it. and its schedules didn't work out, and there were a couple of other things that just weren't aligning, so we weren't able to make it work. But yeah, it's a shame. Again, it was a lot of fun. I'd be so down to do it again, but it just didn't work out.
Would you ever consider doing it again in the future?
Yeah, absolutely, bro. If things aligned and like everything worked out right and schedules worked and what all that other stuff, yeah. Because who else? I mean, you've been around esports for a while, right? You've talked to a couple of different scenes from Dota to League to Valorant now. Have you ever come across anyone else who is even tangentially involved to the Big Buck Hunter World Championships?
It's because like it's been referred to like a little bit, like just a few occasions on camera during the couch part. I think around that time in which you talked to Wyatt during
Yeah,
that couch stream was like the only time that was mentioned.
I think
And
so.
even like in future interview pieces, it was mentioned as well, like just to sort of to highlight the games that you've done, but
Mm.
it was never really dived in, no one really asked more about what that particular time was like. Because like I've I'd watched, like, you did an interview with Esports Driven last year, till end
Mm.
of last year, and that wasn't mentioned. And I was like, what the hell? Like, why did this guy not ask about Big Buck Hunter? Like, it's an arcade game and it's wild, and that's kind of like one of the pieces that would generate some sort of attention, because it's not just like hard-nosed journalism that people are after. It's some also the lighthearted side, and
Yeah.
it's just
Well,
like
hang on. Hang on. Sorry. Are you saying the Big Buck Hunter is not the hard nosed journalism that you were looking for when you started?
that's not what I'm saying. And that's what I'm saying. I'm just putting it out there. Okay, I'm just
No,
putting it out
no, I
there.
know, I know.
I'm just putting it out there. So, still, Big Buck Hunter, EsportsDoug, not very well known before, but hopefully with this interview, everybody's going to know about it, and that's basically the main goal behind this video interview in the first place. Uh, and so moving into Valorant, you sort of touched upon um the incentive and your drive, and you still looking to find whatever else is good and also bad within your line of work within this particular game. And now at this point in which you're in a position where you've casted international events, you've casted grand finals finally, after plenty of time, do you feel like you're at a point in which you can tell yourself, now I can settle down and just not work as hard as before? Do you feel like you reached that point in which you can like settle down now that you're at a position such as the one that I described?
No. And to be really candid with you, I don't know that I ever will. Um, but even like longer term out of the way, I think there's still so many things I want to accomplish. Like I still want an international final, things like that, right? Like there's still things that I want to accomplish, still things that I know are still out there that I have not been able to do. But then also again to go back to I guess to the more bigger picture of me is that's never been me, right? I think for number one, I love the game. I genuinely do. I love the craft. I genuinely do. And so it's easy to want to continue to devote to myself and my attention and my thought and my time into how I can make it better, into how I can improve, into learning from the greats before me who have done what they've done, and being able to pick things from them and continue to make it my own and do things like that. Like I don't know that I'll ever maybe after an international final, I'll sit back and I'll go, you did it. You did it. But there's still so much work to do before that.
You mentioned a little bit about taking inspiration or some reference from other people within the FPS casting scene. So, what are some people that you've looked at that you sort of use as reference for your own work?
Yeah, I think Machine is always the first that comes to mind when I think about this. I mean, he's one of the greatest to ever do it, and he will go down as one of the greatest to ever do it. Possibly the greatest to ever do it, to be honest. He's just the GOAT. He just is. So I really respect him, and I really admire his work because I think he's incredible at what he does. And then there are even like other like Harry and Hugo, also from CS, who haven't been around as long, who have been coming up and who are just so freaking talented. I mean, those guys are nuts. Sadicist is another one who is an older CS guy who's like paved the way, who's incredibly good at what he does. And he's not casting as much anymore, but I think those are a couple of names that come up that are like, yeah, there's a reason why they're as highly regarded across all esports as they are, because it's not just CS where they're considered to be greats. They're considered to be as good as they are. It's well outside of CS. It transfers to other esports. There are other people who take from them from games that are entirely different, that aren't even tac shooters, right? So yeah, those are just a couple.
And it's a sort of never-ending process when it comes to learning what you have to do and how do you improve and what do you have to work on as a caster. And to be honest, not just as a caster. It sort of goes. It says the same about whatever discipline you're at when it comes to esports, be it player, caster, talent, host, analyst, interviewer, fan, whatever. And it reminds me of a quote that you put in uh for a feature piece with upcomer back during 2021 and the early days of Valorant, and how it's gave a spotlight to the ongoing race to be prominent within that game, given that it's new. And the quote that you said that is that we're figuring things out. The fans are figuring things out. The players are figuring things out. There's still just so much that's new. There's still so much there's so much being ironed out that they, being the casters, should get feedback, but maybe keep in mind that we're all on this freaking roller coaster and we don't know when it is going to stop. And so it gives off the notion that everybody's figuring it out, you know. And so at this moment in time, given the things that you've said about yourself and how you progressed, do you feel like you finally figured it out, or are you getting close to it?
I think to your first question, no. I think there's still across the board, but I'll just speak for myself. I think there's still so much we can still be so much better as broadcasters, as talent in Valorant. The game is outrageously hard. Bren actually put together a really good Twitter thread that caught some traction very recently on the comparing the differences or comparing the similarities and differences between casting CS and Valorant, and wow, those are just so drastically different. And I've had this conversation with a couple of people. Valorant's really hard to cast, bro. It's very fast. It's very nuanced. The minor things that can have drastic impacts on rounds you don't even see, right? Because it's happening off screen, or whatever. Somebody could be missing a lineup because of a minor pixel miss, and that throws off the exec, and so the dart doesn't hit as the flash is going. Like, all of these little things, those are things that we don't even see, right? The spectators don't see, the casters don't see. The only people who know that went down are the players in the server. And so I think there's still so much that I will just speak for myself, can get better at when it comes to go full circle to the beginning of the interview, when it comes to telling these players stories and to accurately bring people along in a moment, and things like that. So do I think we as an industry, we as a community are further along than we were a year ago on this roller coaster ride? Yeah. The teams have gotten considerably better. The players have gotten considerably better. The fans still don't really know what they want. And as a broadcast team, yeah, there's still a lot of room where we can get better and where we need to get better. And it's quite frankly, if we aren't thinking about how we can get better, we're doing a disservice to the fans, to the players, and to the game. Because there's still so much. There's still so much where we can get better, where we need to get better.
Yeah, and of course, at this moment in time, at the time of the recording, we're at a time in which the game is going to introduce a new agent deadlock, which is going to be the latest of so many more agents. I already know, knowing Riot, they're going to add like 20 more by next year. Because I remember like one of their aims said, I remember back then that one of their aims with Valorant is to have like around an agent pool around 40 to 60. I'm not sure about that. I might be wrong. I'll have to check out future reference and then correct myself. But still, plenty of agents, each with their own utilities and stuff like that. And it sort of also gives off a sense of being overwhelmed. You know, as a writer, someone who covers the game, and interviews players and does pieces around them. And I want to know, have you felt overwhelmed also as a caster, and given that you basically have to do the same sort of deal as I do?
No, I don't think so. But I also don't think I could continue to work a full-time job and do this. I think if I was doing that, yeah. And the truth is, dude, especially when it comes to international events, there's already too much Valorant to watch as it is. Like there's too many regions to watch. There's too much Valorant to cover. So from that perspective, again, especially if I was working a full-time job too, there ain't no way. Yeah, I would totally feel overwhelmed. And I still, and maybe this is just me being me, but I still feel like I could be doing more, right? So maybe overwhelmed isn't the right word, but is there more that can be done? Or do I think there's more that I can be doing? Yeah.
What do you think those things should be? What do you think those things are?
I mean, there's always more film you could be watching. There's always more player background you could be studying. There's always more mechanics you could be working on, more wordplay, more different ways to communicate the same thing. Things like that. Excuse me, things like that. There will always be more that you can do.
And of course, and yeah, I agree as well. You know, it's a never-ending process in this game, and also about that, covering various, or with there being various regions in this VCT. I've had the opportunity to talk to various other people, well, various people in each region. Like for example, I talked to Shadow of Apex, and then also Roxy of Class A Esports after Split One, uh, with um after Split One of the Challengers level, and it's basically, as you said, there's too much Valorant to go around, and it sort of gives me the opportunity to ask out of curiosity to you, there's been plenty of talk about the scheduling and stuff like that in both the tier 1 and tier 2 level. What do you think about the scheduling, about and the issues that it has, given that um, it jumbles everything together at a time? Like, for example, in tier 1, we've had lock-in, the international leagues, which last for around 2 months, be it combining the group stage and the playoffs, and then masters, and then champions all together
Oh, and
within
then
this.
LCQ and then champs. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of that basically jumps together around like 5 months, which then leaves around like a lot of time left over. And then even so, you have that together with tier 2 and challengers, which has basically happened around the same time period.
Mm-hmm.
And
And then
then,
game changers.
yeah, and game changers, and then game changers happens around like, it's gonna happen around like November or December, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, and then within game changers, there's like a massive gap within each region, within each tournament for a given region. Like, for example, in North America, um, we'd had game changers around like March, and then the second one just is happening right now in July, and then there's another one around like September.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a massive gap, and there's basically not much else for those teams to do. And so, what do you think about also, not also, but what do you think about the current schedule for the VCT as it happened 2020 in 2023, given that you were a part of it firsthand?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was only part of a fraction of it, to be clear, and even then, that fraction of it felt. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, you described it just for what I've been involved in. Uh, Lock in into Americas, into playoffs, into Japan, into LCQ, and then champs. And then Game Changers was in that. I didn't do Ascension or Challengers or Ascension or anything like that. But I mean, I think the difficulty with this is I Riot. It's a lot of Valorant. It's a global game, and Valorant is not Riot's only global game, right? And I think that's where, yeah, I think that's where there's only a limited amount of time. There are only 365 days in a year, and you're trying to run two enormous worldwide global titles simultaneously. So there will be natural difficulties with things like this, and I mean, it's a lot, but that's the nature of the beast currently. To be honest with you, I think, maybe this year, if we started in January as opposed to March or whenever, March or February, March, whenever lock-in was. Maybe it doesn't feel as condensed because it's a little bit more spread out, but we also still, I mean, the players need an off season. The orgs need an off season, right? So it's just a difficulty. I mean, it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah, for reference, login started in February, and then champs is gonna start around start of August,
Mm.
and it'll last until the 26th, and so 6 months, and all of that all together. That's why I felt the need to guys, because like, you have half of a year all Valorant, and then the other half of the year nothing else. I mean, they
Yeah.
have off season, but I mean, not much has been announced about what will take part during that time frame, and it's an interesting thing to ask, considering in other esports, League of Legends, they normally have their worlds happen around like October, September,
Mm-hmm.
around there, and then you have the off season, and then the season comes back up like around late January, February, stuff like that. And so I felt the need to ask about the comparison, given that how the off season is shaping out to be for this particular game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think again it goes back to some of the difficulties of trying to run two massive titles, and then also just the reality that both of our worlds happen at about the same time. Right? I can't fathom how difficult it would be for Riot to run both champs and worlds simultaneously. That's a Herculean feat.
Yeah, and it's also makes sense because like you don't want to have all of the viewership combat each other, and even within the same sort of ecosystem within Riot. And yeah, like it's a sort of things that they have to work on, and it's something that we'll have to continue speculating over, not just within this conversation, but in the rest of the Valorant esports scene. And so, taking the direction back towards yourself, Doug, I want to ask about your casting in particular and the calls that you make. I think one of the most memorable calls, or at least one that has stood out to me, was in Champions 2021, in
Mm.
which Drew defeated Fnatic in quarterfinals, and then you finished your call with "Vamos Latinoamerica, Vamos Crew," and I feel like that it's a call that has to be keep continue to repeating, because not just as someone who has ties to Latin America, but also as a just a Valorant viewer and someone
Mm.
who enjoys Valorant. And so I want to ask to you, would it be fair to say that as your most memorable call, or like your most memorable moment when it came to calling a given match? Is it or is it not? And if so, for not, what is it?
Yeah, probably. I'd say that's probably. I think I've been fortunate to cast a couple of really cool moments in Valorant's history. I think the tens line that everyone talks about. That's another really popular one. I think. Yeah, there have been a couple of. I think it's every now and then when I'm streaming, we'll have this conversation in my chat. And they're like, what's your favorite call? And they'll start talking about what their favorite calls are and things like that. um, and again, I think I've been very fortunate to have been able to call some really special, really cool moments in Valorant's history. And that one's, I'd be interested to see what people think. I think if that question was asked, I think a lot of people would say that one. That one was pretty cool too, because obviously you're crossing languages. It was a very big global moment on an international stage. So obviously, everyone was really invested, and it was really cool. Yeah, I'd say that one's up there for sure.
Was it planned?
No, that one was not. I've had a couple that are like. There are some where I'll come up with something like the round prior, like rookies to Reykjavik when the guard qualified. That one came up like the round prior, but that one, the crew one, that one was just, I don't know. It just kind of happened. I don't know.
Yeah, because like it's replayed over and over and over again in the content piece, which highlights Latin America, and it's perfect because like it could just cut out "Vamos Latinoamerica" and then there you go. That whatever Latin America representative is
Yeah, they win.
representing. Whenever somebody within that region wins, whether it's Crew or Leviathan, I'll be sure to listen to you say that line. And it's astonishing to know that you basically came up with that on the fly. And also also hearing you say that you plan those type of like preparatory lines during a match, because like normally I assume that casters prepare those kinds of memorable lines before a match, not during a match. So
Yeah, I think some again, like for example, the The Leviathan. No, it wasn't that one. The crew, one of the more recent crew matches that I casted, their upper. I don't know. It was a recent match that I casted, where they, the desk set up this, it's a pretty common trope about David versus Goliath, right? And there was a line that I said at the very end of it where it was like, this turns out this David has a slingshot and a stone of their own. They keep their glass slipper, combining all of these things. And those are things that worked and they came together because the desk set them up. Right. So if I were to want to craft something ahead of time, I wouldn't have that, and I wouldn't be able to tie that into the bigger story and the narrative that the entire show had been building and wanting to move towards and push towards and things like that. So yeah, there are some that I also will think of ahead of time, right? Things like that are maybe a little bit less specific or a little bit more team specific. Yeah, I'd say it's a fair division. I would say where some I'm writing like the round before when Balla's talking and he's breaking something down, and I know, okay, they're broke, right? Like it's 12-9, and the losing team has nothing but sheriffs, right? Like there's very good chance that it's over. Things like that.
What's one match that you look back on and say, man, I could have done better right there, for you?
Optic, Paper Rex, Reykjavik. That was the first time I casted Paper Rex, and Paper Rex were that was their like breakout tournament, right? And I remember the pace at which they played, how chaotic it was, and how quickly it all kind of happened. I often think about that, and I'm like, man, I wish I had handled that better. I wish I had been a little bit more prepared for the chaos that is Paper Rex in that instance, so that I could have done a better service to the story. Not just from a grand like storytelling perspective, but also from an analytical perspective, right? And breaking down what's happening so the viewers can understand. Because I know y'all were lost at first too, right? Like when Paper X comes on the scene, they're like, "What are they doing? They're just holding W." We know they're not actually holding W. So our job in that instance is how do we convey what's actually taking place? What is it that makes them that good? Because they're not actually just holding W, contrary to what people say. And I felt like I should have been better. I should have been better in that instance.
And then for the record, that was Copenhagen, not Reykjavik. Yeah, that was Copenhagen. Because like they've only faced off against each other one time, and that was Copenhagen. And that was in front of a crowd, right?
No.
No? Because that's so far. Because Optic and Paper Rex didn't face off in Reykjavik 2022, right?
Yeah, not 2021. What am I thinking of then? What was the...
Because the only one I've seen is Copenhagen, upper bracket finals. And that's the one you called.
What am I thinking of then? I just remember them getting obliterated on Split and being like, man, I didn't do that well. Did they play on Split in Copenhagen? No, I was really happy with our Copenhagen crowdcast. What was the last?
You got it wrong. It's FPX. Or no. You know what? No. Pansy and Hypok answered that. So you might be talking about another event, or you're confusing Paper X with another team, or maybe Optic as well.
I don't remember. No, it couldn't have been. Yeah, it couldn't have been Reykjavik. What was the last match? I don't know. I don't remember. I guess, I don't know. I remember walking away from what I thought was that cast and thinking, I know it was Paper X, and I know I didn't handle it as well as I should have. Was it G2? Was it Paper X? No. because then people were talking about how I was biased caster.
But the only positive is Paper Rex, right?
Well, I'm questioning everything now. Maybe Paper X the guard?
Yeah, maybe that. Because you
Was
said
that it?
because you said you weren't casting in front of a crowd, right?
Yeah, it wasn't in front of a crowd. Hang on.
So it has to be that one, Paper Rex, because they played in Split. They played in
They
Haven
did
and
play Split?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's got to be that, I believe.
must be. Yeah, that must be it. What year was that? That was 2022.
Yeah, and that is surely enough Reykjavik in 2022. So yeah, you might
Yeah.
have gotten the NA team wrong. So I think that was it.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, that one.
Pedro Romero, esports journalist, coming in at the clutch. Coming in at the clutch right there.
Much needed.
For real, for real. And uh one thing that I want to get back on from the conversation that we touched upon earlier is Hispanic roots and
Mm.
the presence of Latinos and Hispanics because, of course, I'm Hispanic, you're Hispanic. We've seen other Hispanic people within this particular game, Golden Boy, Dryad, other people, which I might not, which whose names are can't I can't say off the top of my head. And so it's sort of an interesting dynamic to consider the presence of Hispanic people within esports. And so, what do you think of the current presence of Latinos that are working in esports? In any sort of aspect that they're in. And
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say I was going to also follow it up with, and how does that compare with when you started?
I think that's an interesting one because when I first started, it was such a small sliver, right, of esports, and there was so much more to esports that I just have no knowledge of and wasn't privy to at the time. Um, yeah, but I think it's super dope personally. Like Golden Boy and I will joke around. Kakuka and I will joke around. She's another one. Dan, there are a bunch of like Latino people that I get to work with and talk to and mess around with. Dan. The entire broadcast. That was the other cool part about this year was having the multiple broadcast languages all there in the arena with us. Like we get to spend time with each other. We hang out in the green room. We spend time together, what have you. And being able to do stuff like that was just really cool. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's really special because while it was a pretty small subsection that I was in when I was first getting into esports, there weren't brown people. That just wasn't really a thing. And so being able to see that grow and seeing, again, it was a focus from Valorant from the very beginning, and I think they're doing an excellent job at excelling in that, is wanting to make it a global sport, right? Not just in that there are global regions to the sport, but that even interregionally, it's a communal thing. It's a global thing. I think that's something that's really cool.
And what has been the as someone who has been able to interact with people from the Latin America and also Brazilian side of the region of America's region, what do you say has been the difference in terms of like casting between English, Latin America, and also Brazilian, if you're able to differentiate?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about different casting styles in those regions and really across any other region is for NA and EMEA, we are held to a different standard. So you listen to a Japanese broadcast casting a Japanese team, and they want their team to win. And it's cool. It's awesome. Like, it's super encouraging. It's wholesome. Everyone gets behind it. Latin America, it's the same way, right? Like any other region, they are rooting for their region to win. And I think that's cool. right? Like I think it's really dope to see the run that Zeta went on, and to have the Japanese casters like showing emotion and stuff like that when they perform. That's awesome. That's so freaking cool. NA and EMEA casters can't do that. Not that, to be clear, I think at least for NA, I can't speak as much for EMEA. None of us are really region homers to begin with. But if we wanted to, we couldn't do that because we're biased, right? Like we things like that. And that's just not how other talent is treated. So when I think about differences and things like that, that's one thing that stands out. I also think stylistic differences come out. So for example, Spanish casting is very fast. It's very energetic. It's very, bam, 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 bam. We can't do that. And we don't do that. So, right. So there are just some stylistic differences on things like that I think come through when you try to watch, like when you compare 3 different broadcasts at one time. You may not have to understand the language to understand or to see what those differences are.
Mm-hmm. Of course. And did anyone, out of curiosity, like from the Latin American side approach you and say, "Oh, you Doug, I've listened to your cast," or has any of that happened? Because like, um, on the casting side, you're like one of the most prominent, or perhaps the most prominent, um, Hispanic caster within the English speaking crowd.
Yeah, I'll have people come through. I'll get the occasional DM, and then I'll have people come through chat or my Twitch chat and stuff like that. And then when we have had in-person events and things like that, they've had people like come up and say things like that as well, which is really cool. It's still so odd to me that like people listen to me, right? That's just still such a foreign idea. But again, those who are willing to like go out of their way because they want to say something like that, again, be it in person, DMs, Twitch chat, whatever, they're always so friendly and so like just so cool, right? Like they're just genuinely cool people. They're really dope. So I have had a couple of instances like that, and they're always so wholesome.
Mm-hmm. And we're approaching the tail end of this conversation, but I have a few more questions to ask. Um, you sort of mentioned about you appearing. You talked a little bit about your experience and what it was like to appear in the grand finals of
Mm.
of a pair of events. Of course, you covered grand finals of Game Changers and V1 and Shopify Rebellion, but I feel like the biggest highlight for you this year so far is you covering grand finals of LOUD and NRG, and it's not the international finals that you are aspiring to have, but still to be able to cover that particular event at that particular time when there's so many other combinations in which um should have been selected as opposed to you. It's a massive achievement. I would say, talking about you. And so when you got the heads up that yes, you were going to do the finals for Loud and NRG, how did you take it in, and how did you, prepare? Was it sort of similar to how you prepare for past events, or was it different because of this particular occasion?
Yeah, I'd say the preparation was pretty similar. Um, in how I normally go about things and what I like to think of leading into it. But I think there was definitely there was a little extra edge, right? There was a little extra energy, there was a little extra intensity to it for sure, because I wanted to do it justice, right? Like I want I don't know if I could say it's a biggest fear, but I just want to make sure I do moments justice. And yeah, I think because of that, going into that final, I wanted to make sure that I was as prepared as possible, that I was, again, hitting all of the things that I focus on in a correct way, in an accurate way, and in a justified way. Because to go back to something we were talking about earlier, if we're not doing that, it's a disservice. Like we're yeah, from the players to the spectators to the show to everything. That's our job. And so again, preparation was very similar, but there was definitely there was a little extra buzz. There was a little extra in that, because again, I wanted to do it as well as I could.
I mentioned that in my opinion it was your biggest highlight for your career in Valorant in particular. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think so. Being able to cast the very first crowd match for Valorant ever was really cool. That was at Copenhagen. That was awesome. Casting the very first Americas match ever was really dope. Casting the grand finals there was very dope. So I'd say, unless there's a really big one that I'm forgetting, I'd say those three. Yeah, those three are very special. Very special.
Then I gotta ask, which one's the best out of those three?
Best from what perspective? Best, like, did I think I casted my best, or like from what point of view?
From a point of view of you looking back and seeing how you did, not just like you,
Yeah.
and not just you in the moment of actually working in the cast. Just you looking back.
Yeah.
Looking back and
I'd say the Americas finals. I'd say the Americas finals. Yeah, I was really happy. I was very happy with all three of them, and I say that being outrageously critical of myself. But yeah, I'd say the Americas one for sure.
and to see you start your career working various games for so many years and hopping around each particular title for a given amount of time, and then um, to then reach Valorant and being in the position that you are. It's sort of similar to the previous question earlier in this conversation about like whether you feel you've truly settled in. It's sort of similar to that. And taking in your history, what about Valorant made it work for you?
I knew I loved the game, and I figured that out pretty quickly. I loved how technical it could be. I didn't watch CS. I didn't play CS. I didn't have that background at all. So maybe compared to CS, it isn't as technical. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would say that. I don't know, and obviously I don't care either way. But I knew that I was going to love it because it was as technical as it was. But then also, I think I got lucky in a lot of ways. I got beta access the first day, when people had to wait like a week, and I instantly fell in love with the game. This is way less known, and it was way less of a lift. But during the beta period, I organized a tournament, just like a really small tournament with a bunch of influencer friends who had access to the game, and I casted that by myself. So I knew from the very beginning that I really enjoyed the game, and it was a lot of fun. And things just kind of kept falling into place in a way that I'm like, all right, this may be a thing. This is gonna work.
Out of curiosity, was it that event that you mentioned? Was it the Elite Sports thing, Rivalry Bowl, or is it another one?
No, that was something else.
Okay.
The Elite Esports thing was like an actual show. The thing that I'm referring to is just like I had influencer friends. I was like, hey, I'm going to run a tournament, make a team, come play. Much more low key. But again, same idea in that I knew I wanted to cast it. I love the game, and I was willing to do things to make sure that happened.
And of course, you definitely did from then on up until now. Um, Given that you mentioned about in other videos about how you feel like you're not going to be um, covering the game forever, you're not going to be doing this forever as a caster, you're going to have other things to do in the future, whatever it is that may be. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 or so years from now?
5 years, that's a long time. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I think the game will continue to evolve and change, and the scene and the community will continue to evolve and change with it. Also, life. I mean, 5 years from now, you know, we were talking about this earlier, joking. I'll be 38.
Yeah, that's when I can't deny the
That's old, bro.
yeah, that's old.
Yeah, that's mad old. So, I mean, will I look like I'm 38? Probably not. Will people still be surprised? And you're how old? Yeah, probably. And so maybe that'll extend my shelf life a little bit longer, if you will. But yeah, I think I have no idea. There's so much of this that changes so quickly that at this point, year by year is is how I think about it.
And comparing the EsportsDoug from before when you started to the EsportsDoug that you are right now, sitting right here talking about your life in reflection and being in this particular mindset. Um, what do you think is the one thing that changed the most for the better for you in your career, Doug?
Change the most from the beginning until now for the better. I'd like to think I'm getting better at slowing down and like taking in cool moments. Uh, that was not always the case. But I'd like to think I'm getting a little bit better at like what a cool job. What a cool like as driven and ambitious and as hungry as I can be. I think I've gotten better at you travel the world and you talk about video games, man. That's pretty freaking dope. And again, you've been really fortunate to cast some really special matches. You've been fortunate to randomly happen to be casting very special moments in Valorant history. So I still don't do it as well as I should, but I'd like to think I'm getting a little bit better at reflecting on that some and just slowing down long enough to allow myself to think on those things.
Right, indeed. And so apologies for the slight little noise issue with that.
Oh, I didn't hear it. You're good.
Oh, shh, I didn't say anything. Um, Final question. Before I wrap it up, taking everything into account, this entire conversation, for those that are looking to get into this game and covering this game in the same manner that you did in the start until now, what do you feel is your biggest advice that you want to share to those that are looking to traverse the same road as you have?
this is going to sound cliche because I got this same advice from Captain Flowers, oddly enough. But he's so right. There is no right way. There is no formula. There is no thing that you check these boxes, you do this thing, and then you'll make it. You'll be casting S tier events. With that in mind, the advice that I give people a lot when they're like, I want to get into casting, what do I do? What do you recommend? Cut your own clips of you casting. Find pro matches and then turn the casters down and then you cast over it, or have your friends send you clips and you cast over them, whatever. Cast it and then put it out everywhere. Put it on Reddit, put it on Twitter, put it on TikTok, put it on YouTube, put it on, inundate, put it everywhere you can possibly think of to put it. Get as many eyes on it as possible. Much like the charity event, we have the benefit now of being able to create content and put it out for people to see. And you're going to get hired from people listening to you and hearing you cast. So you have a benefit of being able to do that in a way that has not always been the case. So put it out there and be unconventional, right? Like, again, there's not a correct way. Oh, and also don't be afraid of cold DMing people. Just DM people, man. Just do it. You're going to get rejected. If you're going to DM 100 people, 90 of them are going to ignore you. That's okay, right? It's just part of it. But that's how, you hustle and you grind.
Yeah, and also to reinforce that, started out. This whole thing started because I sent out a message by DM to Doug, which took a little while for him to respond. I'll give him that, but still, he did, and such video that you're watching right now is the result of just giving out that initial message. Doug, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. I really appreciate it. And I really also appreciate you taking the time and answering them as best as you could.
Of course.
Like I said in the end of the previous conversation, I do not know who I'm going to have for my next video interview series, whatever this is going to be called. I still don't have a title for this. But in any case, when that next video does drop, I'll be sure to find you guys again in the future. So with that said, EsportsDoug, I've been Pedro Romero, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.